good morning, and welcome to Dear Life After. I am your host, Roslyn Long, and I am so glad that you decided to join us on today. You could be doing so many other things with your time. So, hello, Facebook and YouTube family. Listen, you already know what? You still have time to do what? Tag a friend, tweet a friend, text a friend, and tell them to come and join us. You don't want to miss this special episode on today. We're doing something a little different on today, but nonetheless, hey, it's going to be awesome and amazing. So I hope you're ready because listen, I have some very special gentlemen on the show today, and I am just so honored that they took out the time to come on here and discuss with us what is in the current events and that is going on in the world. So we're not going to waste any of your time. We're going to go ahead and bring on these two wonderful gentlemen who have been in law enforcement for a long time. Let's just say that they've been in law enforcement for a long time. But nevertheless, we have Keith Humphrey and Virgil Green. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. How you doing?
How are you this morning?
I am awesome. I am awesome on this beautiful Saturday. So listen, I know that we keep hearing, we keep seeing all the video, the footage of the tragic death, or should I say, the tragic murder of Sonia Massey. Um, I know for me, as just a regular citizen, I'm sure I look at it a little different than you guys do, being in law enforcement. So let's just kind of talk about how these things, what are we going to do about all of this?
Well, thank you for having us on, Rosalind. Virgil and I talk about this constantly. I don't know. The foundation is there for improvement. We have since the George Floyd incident. Well before then, there was talking, and we talk about 2015 when President Obama convened the committee, 21st Century Policing Committee, and it laid out a platform that police officers and law enforcement agencies could follow in order to improve the relationships, especially between communities of color and law enforcement. One of those things that was covered was wellness, not just the physical part, but the emotional part of it. Mm-hmm. And so the one thing that we can't determine completely, we can't determine what a person's heart and soul is thinking. And so I don't know, we'll never be able to detect that. But I think we need to start holding people more accountable for their actions. Number one, if you hire someone who has the background that this person had, the question should be to the sheriff: why would you hire him with the baggage that he had packed up before he came to your department? So that's one of the things. And Virgil, I mean, you and I, we talk about this, and yeah. I know Virgil's got some comments about it also.
Yeah, Rosalind, definitely thank you for allowing us to come on your podcast this morning. I think for me, it's something that I've been talking about for a very long time, is that the culture of policing needs to change. The culture of policing has been in this state for decades, and there's a lot of resistance within this profession that we're in to change. And I've said this on our podcast, that we are one of the most segregated workplaces uh, in the world. We're very segregated, and some people will say, "Well, not really." When you look at the demographics of Black men and Black women in this profession, we're a very small percentage of this in this profession. Mm-hmm. And so then when you go back and you look at things that happened in the 60s, in the 70s with policing, every single thing that we have seen has occurred because of the actions of police officers. Now,
Hmm.
yeah, there's been some things that has caused police officers to take some action, but when you go back and just look at, and for me, we were born in the '60s, so we saw those things that we were growing up. What happened during the civil rights era? Everything that happened in that civil rights era was because of police. When did
Hmm.
you ever? When have we ever heard police officers preventing people from going for black people going to vote? That has nothing to do with police, and there was no crimes being committed, but law enforcement played a significant role in preventing black people from voting. And so now you have law enforcement continuing to take that stand. Not instant change. It went from preventing black people from voting. Now it is uh, other things that we're going to make sure that you shouldn't be doing, and we're going to be there to make sure that you know we're going to send you to jail. We're going to arrest you, send you to jail, and hope you never get out. That's the attitude of some police officers. So for me, it's the culture policing has to change.
So this is one of the questions from me. I was looking at the fact that I was one of our candidates had made mention that there would be no retribution or consequences, should I say, when these sorts of things happen when police
Mhm.
officer own. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that's a really big thing in regards to when we start, and I know that's a whole nother topic, but when we start thinking about who we're voting for
Yeah.
and the things that they stand for,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
So
for,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rosalind. I'm sorry.
no, I'm just saying, especially, for us, because it's going to look much different for us than it will, for other people.
Yeah. So Virgil and I, we talk about this also, and we definitely try to keep politics out of our discussion. But what I will say is that law enforcement has brought politics into it. I have a big problem, and I can't speak for Virgil, but I can speak for him because we've had these conversations. I have a big problem with law enforcement endorsing candidates. And we have that throughout the nation. On the local government, state government, you'll have police organizations that will be supporting. So if you look at, just say, an association, a union, say that we're supporting a candidate, the whole nation feels as though all police officers are supporting that candidate, and that is not true.
Absolutely.
So that
Right.
puts us in a really bad position. The questions that you ask, it puts us in a bad position because they automatically think that we're support. I'm a firm believer you shouldn't have any paraphernalia in your office when it comes to around election time, because I have seen so much dissension when it comes to whether it's local, state, or national politics. I've seen so many almost fights. People have their beliefs, and so those are the things that they don't. Those type of things don't help us, Rosalind, when we try to build that relationship. Because if you don't like the candidate, you automatically think that all police officers support that particular candidate based on the fact that the union has come out and endorsed them.
Okay. That makes sense.
Roger, to piggyback on that, during the last election, this actually took place. I want to say it either was in Philadelphia or Baltimore, one of these cities where their police union supported the person who was running for president again. I just won't say that person's name.
Okay.
So that union was supporting him. The black police officers came out and said, "You didn't. That's not somebody that we're supporting." So it's not. You're giving the impression to the public that everybody is supporting this candidate. And so, again, it goes back to what I just said a while ago. The culture of policing needs to change because you've got this blue wall, but then when you're black, there's a difference of how you're being treated, and people will say, "Well, you're here, you deal with it." So the black voices within policing is not a very strong voice. And so once again, you have unions making decisions, but everybody feels like, well, you're a part of the union, you're supporting that candidate, and that's not the case.
And Rosalind, we believe in the representation of unions, because there is a need for those. I mean, we wouldn't have
Right.
some of the equipment, the finances and things like that if we did not. And I believe in due process and things like that. But we shouldn't be endorsing candidates. You got to keep, we've always talked church and state should not
Mm-hmm.
go hand in hand. I feel the same thing with law enforcement because it does bring so much dissension, especially during this time. It does in
Absolutely.
law enforcement agencies. It brings so much dissension, and we've got to put some laws on the books, I believe, that prevents unions bargaining. Represent units who represent employees for endorsing candidates because everybody
Absolutely.
doesn't feel that. Everybody doesn't feel that strongly about a candidate. That one particular
Right.
candidate.
Absolutely.
They completely out of
So
it.
So when we talk about the Sonia Massey incident, and I'm just thinking about how on the incident we saw that they were in her home, and they asked her, they made mention to her about the pot on the stove and things like that, but then the pot on the stove became the issue, so to speak, that as if the officer was afraid that she was going to do something to him with the boiling water or whatever. I mean, what do you think could have been, what could have been, how could this have been handled differently so this lady wouldn't have lost her life?
What could
But
have
we,
been handled differently
yeah,
for them not going inside of her home? That's the first
well,
thing that should have been
yeah.
handled differently. There was no
There was no
reason
reason for them to
for
go
them.
inside our home.
No, no. So
Wow.
they were called there because she said that she heard somebody outside of her home, like a prowler. So you see there's probably at least six different clips that have been put out to the public about, you see the first one, they're walking around the house, checking, an outside shed or something. Then they make contact with her, tell her, hey, we didn't see anybody. Uh, then it goes to whose car, the car in the driveway. Now there's a focus on the window that's busted out in the car in the driveway. Then they go inside of her home. Now they're asking her for her ID. Well, why are you asking for her for her ID? You ask her for a name. There was uh, very quickly, Rosamund, you can tell that she was not really all there. There was something going on with her, and
Absolutely.
so, but these officers did not pick up on that, and so they went into the same attitude that a lot of white cops have when they go into black people's homes, that they're going to take control of that situation. And so now you're asking her what her name is, you're asking her for an ID, and then all of a sudden you see that there's something boiling on the stove, and she goes to remove it, and then she, for whatever reason, said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And she repeats it again. And this officer immediately pulls out his weapon, points it at her, and she drops to the floor and says, I'm sorry. But you got to go back to when they first made contact with her. She mentioned, please don't hurt me. So
Absolutely.
there were some things there that they should have probably said, hey, we're here to help you. We're not here to hurt you. But their focus went on the car and getting inside of her home. But clearly, they're at when she pulled when the pot incident happened. Clearly, that officer, when he pulled out his weapon, and he said that that he was going to shoot her in her face. He used some other words, but said he was going to shoot her in her face and
Mhm.
kill her. And that's exactly what he did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there were clearly some, probably some mental uh, issues going on there. And what is there formal training for officers in regards to being able to possibly recognize things in those situations?
So
Very
there's no,
little.
and that's one of the things that Virgil and I talk about. We talk about standards. There is training. We call it CIT, crisis intervention training. Um, there's a minimal number of hours that police departments, as far as in recruits, there's a minimum number because you have so many other things to go over, but there's a minimal number of hours that the state requires you to do. But those departments can add more to it. And it's basically, you're not mental health experts, but it's able to provide you enough training where you recognize someone that's in crisis to where you can know, okay, what further steps do we need to take? Do we need to do an emergency detention? Do we need to get someone over here to watch them, get more information, get in contact with the doctor? So it causes you to be aware. There is training that goes above that and beyond that. Not a lot of people have it, but anyway, there is. And so, but when you have that tunnel vision and you're focused on, I got to get in this house, I've got to run this person, I've got to see if they've got a warrant. I'm not going to leave this place without somebody going to jail. When you're in that mindset, common sense is out the door. And so that's what we see here. There was no reason for them to go inside the house. They could have handled everything, got her name. Virgil, how many times have we been on calls and in those type of situations? A person comes to the door, they give us their names. Hey, ma'am, everything okay? Yeah. Okay, we're just checking on you, and you leave. There was no reason to go inside the house, but right off the bat, Roslyn, when you go in, you saw there was something there. I mean, you saw the stacks and stacks of stuff, clothing and
House was a little,
stuff like
the
that.
house
So
was a
there
little
was
disarray.
a clue that something was wrong.
So if I called and I said, hey, 911, non-emergency, whatever I called, I'm thinking there's a burglary. You come to my house as the police, you look around, you come to the door, I come to the door, and you identify yourself. Obviously, I know you're the police, you're in uniform, and you ask me who I am, I tell you. So you're telling me that if you come, I don't, at that point, it's not, I don't have to give you my identification because you've come to my home? I'm just trying to clarify for me.
Well, the
Or
So,
is
information.
and this
Yeah,
is
go
the
ahead,
thing,
Virgil.
and I think this is the thing, Rosalind, and to those who are listening, I think people, if an officer says, "Hey, I need to see your ID," for one, there's not a crime that has just been committed, other than you're calling because you think that there's a burglar, suspicious person around your property. Uh, what is that officer going to do with that information? So you don't have to give that officer your name. Uh, Now you'll have some people say, "Well, you do. Just go ahead and give it to them." But again, at the end of the day, there's going to be some legal experts that's going to say, "Well, no, you don't. You don't have to." Because the one thing that I ask, so what are you going to do with that person's name, other than knowing? Because you already know who they are. So let's just stop it right there. When that
mm-hmm,
person calls the dispatcher, that's that dispatcher is going to say, what's your first name, last name? So that dispatcher has every information about you. And now there's computers in officers' cars, so they know who you are. They even can pull up your date of birth and all that information, your driving license information, so they know. Uh, but there again, it just goes back to, this is the culture of policing, and this is the way officers have been trained for decades and decades. And you have a lot of things that people don't want to change. But now you have the problem where people who look like you and I are resistant to calling the police because of what happened to Sonia Massey. We talked about this on our show. There was an incident that happened in Fort Worth, Texas, very almost similar to what happened in Springfield, Illinois with Sonia Massey.
mm-hmm.
So for Black women, and I'm going to say it, since 2015, over 250 Black women have been killed by police officers.
Okay.
That is, so when you think about that, that's almost like 25 per year.
Mhm.
So why are black women that much of a threat to a white police officer? Why?
Absolutely.
That's the big. Why is a black woman that much of a threat?
That's an awesome question because I mean I'm not a little girl or woman, but I mean I don't have the strength that a man does, you know, and obviously as a man and even as a police officer, there are other ways that you could subdue me without having to shoot me.
And this
Yeah, and
guy was six. This guy was what, 6'4", 6'5", pretty buff guy. So here's this lady who is standing probably not even 120 pounds, who is half. There was no threat whatsoever that she caused to them, other than the fact he was irritated that, number one, that they were there. Two,
well,
now there's some other things going on with her, and just a split second, what she said triggered him to pull out his weapon and kill her. He murdered her. I mean, that was, when we talk about an assassination, that was an assassination right there.
well, let me say
And
this,
he
and
tried to, and they tried to cover it up. And I think that's something that we also need to talk about. There was an attempt to cover this up from the beginning.
Yes.
well,
Yes.
I think we talk about stature and things, and let's take the stature completely out of it. It's the fact of the matter, the emotional intelligence of everybody out here is not willing, and we've got to get officers to understand that everybody out here does not want to hurt you because people live in a certain area, because people have maybe had some experience in the criminal justice system. That doesn't mean they're going to hurt you. And so it comes down to the emotional intelligence. And we have to learn, how to control that. Because in those situations, we're in control of those situations. There was so much they could have done. And Virgil is right. What is the problem? Why do we continue to see these things involving white officers and black men and black women? That's the question right there. And you know, at the end of the day, you had no reason in her house unless you open the door and there's probable cause to go in the house. There was no probable cause or reasonable suspicion for them to go into that house. She didn't have to give them her name. Her giving them their name was something that she decided to do. She wasn't mandated by any law to give them her name because she called. That was a situation. She had a situation outside. There was no indication to me that there was any exigent circumstances inside for them to want to go inside her house. So the probable cause of reasonable suspicion to be inside her house did not exist.
Yeah, I mean because
Rosalind, and to those, no,
and I
go
think
ahead.
that
I'm
it's
sorry.
just natural to want to be compliant, so to speak, thinking, since they came to the door,
Mhm.
and of course, quite naturally, you're thinking, okay, well, this is the police. The police is to protect and serve. So quite naturally, most of the time, there was a time that you felt safe in letting, the police officers into your home. Um, and I'm sure obviously, that's a whole nother topic as well, but obviously she felt something or she wouldn't have even been saying I rebuke you in the name of Jesus,
Yeah,
because she
yeah,
felt something in her spirit
yeah,
that that wasn't
exactly.
right.
Yeah, and so to touch on something else, one of the things, and this goes back to the culture of policing. One of the things that cops are taught from day one is that you're going home to your family. That's the number one thing that is drilled into your. It becomes a part of
Right.
your DNA.
Okay.
You need to go home to you and your family. Forget about everybody else. If that means you got to take somebody else's life, you take it, but you are going home to you and your family. We've seen all these incidents that have happened with black men and black women, from uh, Michael Brown to George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, and
Hmm.
so on and so on. And but the cop doesn't think about that person in their family. It's only thought about after the fact. and the after the fact, the person's life is gone. And so, I said this to my partner that we don't have, we talk about keeping politics out of policing, and we talk about the soul of policing. We don't have a lot of police officers who probably are in connect with whatever religion that they're a part of. And so when you didn't come from a family that said, hey, every Sunday you're going to church, and you come up with that upbringing and you get into this profession, you don't value nobody's life. And you're surely not going to value a Black person's life, because Black people are somebody that you really haven't dealt with. And so, you know, Keith and I kind of disagree with this, but I think we need to talk about more about uh, making sure that officers understand there is another part of what we need to be talking about when it comes to the position of religion. What is your belief? What is,
Mm-hmm.
there was a police department I was at in Arkansas that every Monday morning, a group of preachers would come in front of the police department and pray. Every Monday. They've been doing that for decades. You're going to have some people who say, well, we can't do that because that's a separation of
Right.
church and
Absolutely.
public or
State.
whatever,
Uh-huh.
state. That's not good. But if you don't get up and because when you go to church, you have a different mindset about life and things that's going on around you. When you don't, you just don't care. And I think that's the piece that's missing, and that's another part of the culture of policing that has to change.
Well, Virgil, I'm going to say this to Roslyn and the audience. There's so many opportunities because a lot of police departments in the nation that have chaplain programs, and everyone has that freedom to go and talk to those chaplains. To the point that a lot of police departments are even bringing in chaplains from multiple other denominations. So you don't just have Baptists. I mean, some have rabbis and
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So you can talk. But I will say this: I don't even think it's a religious thing. I think it's a form of not. I think it's a form of dehumanization. I think that there are some officers who just don't see certain people as human. And the fact of the matter is, Virgil is correct, is absolutely correct. There is that, mindset. I'm gonna go home at the end of the day, and I don't have a problem with that as much as I have a problem with the fact that by any means necessary. I'm going to go home at the end of the day by any means necessary because we realize this is a very, very dangerous job that we chose to be a part of. We chose to be a part of this profession. And so we understand that there's that understanding that we might go to work that day and not come home, but everybody's not going to pose a threat to us. And it's the emotional intelligence part of it. We have to stop dehumanizing. And the dehumanization in this situation came while inside the home, and it even further was a problem afterwards. Because think about it, we've been focusing on providing medical assistance. So now this lady's been shot. The partner says, I'm gonna go get my first aid. And this guy says, oh, it's a headshot, don't worry about it. Okay, that's number one. Well, number one, the first one, it was when she was shot. He told her he was gonna shoot her in the face. And he did. That's number one. Number two, not providing medical attention, not even going over to see if she had a pulse or anything. And then number three was when they got outside, he's referring to her as the B word. And so those are three dehumanizing areas in this situation. And so, it comes down to the fact of, dude, what was so bad that you had to shoot her? Because Roslyn, we've been teaching de-escalation tactics. And
Mm-hmm.
de-escalation tactics focus on cover and concealment. Okay? It focuses on cover and concealment to the point of distance is our friend. So we talk about
Okay.
they had that distance. They had that
Right.
cover and concealment. as a matter of fact, what they should have done, one of those officers should have had a taser, which is less lethal, and be able to utilize that less lethal manner than the lethal form. So there's so many other things. There's so many things I think we need to be following in this situation. But it comes down to the fact of, are we being dehumanized? Does it mean that if we live in a certain position, a certain location, you talk a certain way, you look a certain way, are you being dehumanized by law enforcement? And that's the question, because I can give you all the training, but if you don't have the emotional intelligence to understand where your level of intelligence is on the day that you clock in for work, that's the problem. We know officers that look to shoot people. They want to get they join the police department because they want to run and gun and shoot. That's what they do. They run to. So we know officers like that, black and white officers. That's what they. Yeah. So
that is really sad. But I guess part of that would be, so for me, say for instance, I understand the dehumanization. I do. But what about the part of it when we start thinking about, are there, okay, so as the police officers, at sometimes, some officers were previous military, some officers were
as this guy was,
had different backgrounds, so then we start thinking about PTSD and things that trigger people, and what kind of screening is actually done on police officers to possibly know the mindset of these white policemen, because then you have these white policemen that have this mindset, and then you go and put them in our damn communities.
Well, one of the things, Rosalind, to those who are listening, when we talk about, there's not a national standard that every police department is supposed to follow. Every state does everything different. Every municipality, a county agency may do something different than a municipality does. So that's the number one problem when I go back to the culture of policing. There is not a standardized process that says you are mandated to do this here in every single state. Now, in the George Floyd Criminal Justice Act bill, that is a part of that reform to make sure that every police department has that or is following that same process. That's the number. That's another issue. So this guy who was involved with Sonia Massey, he was in the military. I don't think he was in the military that long, Keith. And I think, if I'm correct, I think he got
1 year, 9 months, and 14 days.
And he got discharged.
Okay.
He was discharged. So he gets out of the military.
Dishonorable.
And
well, let me just say this: from what we're learning, that what he was dismissed from the military for, he could have received a year in Leavenworth prison.
Exactly.
So nobody's talking about it because the military rules are very, very strict when it comes to open records. So we do know that one of the people who've responded for the military say he could have done some time in Leavenworth for what he was discharged from the military for.
But he gets picked up by a police department, a small agency.
Well,
so these guys,
Virgil, back up. He had 2 prior arrests for DUI.
Yeah, 2 prior arrests for DUI. So here you got a guy who has 2 previous driving under the influence. He gets picked up by a small police department. And because, again, he fits that image of what the culture, of what they want their culture of policing to look like. He's this young, tall white guy who's, he's pretty buff. So, hey, we need to get him, and we need to get him on. Very little training. And so now you go back to everything that an officer is told is that those are the bad people. Those are the people that we need to make sure we put in jail. And those bad people look like
town. That's the bad part of town.
And the crazy part, Virgil, is there is no way that had your black tail had some DUIs or some anything, that they would have hired you to sweep the floor
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, exactly. And so again, it goes back to who you know, and hey, he's a good kid. There's a You're right. If that was a black officer who's trying to get in and he's got 2 DUIs, your application, you're not even going to get a call back to tell you this is why you're not going to get an interview. And so again, it's the culture of policing, which has not changed over decades. Some things have changed. And I think this is one thing I wanted to say a while ago. We always say, and we said this on Thursday, we always say there's a lot of good police officers. But guess what? There's a lot of bad police officers. And those good police officers are looking at the bad police officers. And there's very little duty to intervene because, well, I don't want to rat on my partner. Or if I do, then it becomes I'm isolated. So there's a whole lot of other things that's another issue. And so you got a good cop watching a bad cop. And then here the situation we're talking about Sonia Massey, where his partner understands what he just witnessed, that this woman has a gunshot wound to the head, and he is telling him, no, don't go get it, because that's a gunshot wound to the head. He never even went over to even get close to her body to see if he could render any aid. He would have treated a dog better or a deer
Mm,
better than he treated Sonia Massey. That's
we can.
just how, and for you and those who are listening, you got officers who treat animals better than they treat black men and black women. Let's just
Absolutely.
keep it real.
Well, Virgil,
That is the attitude of these guys.
you can look at after the shooting and they had him outside. I've been involved in shootings, and unfortunately, I've been involved in a deadly force situation. And I will tell you, it takes a lot out of you. The emotional part of it, no matter what, no matter justifiable or not, there's an emotional part there's emotions that kick in because you just took a life, whether it was justified or not, you took a life. And this guy was walking around like it was no big deal. Basically, I mean, he's referring to her as this, he's referring to her as that. So that was in his nature. That's his soul. That's in his heart. He felt that
Yes.
way. And so, we talk about the body cameras. We talk about, thank goodness his partner had the body camera on because he had his off, which is a policy violation within itself. But he had his body. So, my thing was, even though the body camera is on, and not just in this incident, it doesn't pick up a person's soul. It doesn't pick up their heart. It picks up the actions, but it doesn't pick up what's in their soul and what's in their heart and what they're thinking, their emotional intelligence. Those are things that we can't see, but there
Right.
are things that we can utilize in
Mhm.
our profession that can pick up certain clues. And the psychological test, that's one of the things that we have to start using better, because we know chiefs that people have failed psychological tests and they're going to take a chance on them anyway. Let's look at Fort Worth. The young lady who was killed in Fort Worth, the officer who killed her had failed the psychological test 3 times. And then the police department appeals that to a board of psychologists who say, yeah, they're going to give him a chance. We know that. We know that there are officers who fail polygraph tests, or polygraph tests come back inconclusive. They get hired because somebody said, well, give them a chance. So that is just this. These are some of the things. I mean, they knew this guy had been discharged. They knew that he had these charges. There are some states, Texas is a state, if you have a DWI, you can't get hired within 10 years of that conviction. But there are some states, Roslyn, and to the audience, that you have police officers working the streets right now that have DUIs. And
That's
so,
that is just that
yeah,
is
they've been
crazy.
convicted. They've been convicted of DUIs, and so they're working the streets. Now they'll get disciplined inside the department, but as far as criminally, that doesn't prohibit them from being police officers in certain states. I came from police departments in Arlington. You get a DUI, you're gone. I mean, you're terminated. If you get a DUI and you're convicted of it, you can't be. It's just like I came from an agency that if you are untruthful, you can't be. I was the chief of an agency that had over 40 officers that had been that had untruthfulness complaints sustained against them, and they were still police. And so these are the things that we're dealing with in our profession. But this is a prime example of it's just like Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin had 18 to 20 complaints against him over his career. And he was still a police officer. Matter of fact, Derek Chauvin was training officers. He was a training officer.
Not, and you know that's almost a joke. But you know, one of the things that I noticed when at all the footage and everything, you know, the partner had on his body cam, but yet the man who did the shooting did not.
Right.
Initially, he didn't. Yeah. After the shooting, he turns it on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so once again, it kind of goes back. This was a sheriff department. Their policies may be different from a municipal police department. One of the things on this deal with Sonia Massey, he's walking outside. There's not a lot of people not a lot of these other officers are really saying that much to him. But I go back to what I mentioned earlier. They tried to cover this up. Somebody called the hospital and said that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So the hospital is going off of what the police officers are telling them. So why would somebody, and that is fact. That's not just something that, that's what the hospital told the family, that we were told that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. One thing you have not, to my knowledge, Keith, and I don't think the sheriff of this in that county in Springfield, Illinois, has said anything public
I haven't
about
heard anything.
the shooting.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. This is something else I want to put in on this conversation. We have we have a few Black law enforcement organizations. We have Black associations. I have not really heard a lot of these organizations or associations coming out publicly saying anything about what happened with Sonia Massey. Now, when the attempted assassination on the person who's running for president again, I saw multiple people coming out making public comments about this was wrong. We shouldn't, this doesn't need to happen in our politics and so forth. But when a Black woman gets killed, nobody says anything. When a Black man gets killed, nobody says anything. You may have, I think the organization that we're part of, Noble, may have came out and said something when George Floyd was killed. Nobody has said anything about Sonia Massey. So we have to look within the organizations that we're a part of and say, why are you all not coming out saying anything publicly to the public? And why are you all not asking and demanding for some accountability? Because at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the culture of policing. We're quiet about some things, but then we're not quiet about other things. So that's another issue. But the whole issue about them trying to cover her death up is a concern. And the fact that her 17-year-old son had to find out how his mother was killed. Her father learned from his brother through the brother reading something in the newspaper or something online that this was actually an officer involved shooting.
Right.
So when you have so many intentional things that this agency was doing to cover this up, and you wonder, okay, well, is DOJ going to get involved with this? But it goes back to if these guys could have covered that up, we wouldn't be talking about it. Not to this
Absolutely.
extent.
Absolutely. But and so that brings to my mind when we start talking about the low percentage of African American officers. And so we have our young black men and black women. So then how do we make them feel okay, so to speak, with wanting to be in that profession, to want to help try to make a change? Knowing yourself at your age and you've been in law enforcement for 30 plus years, both of you guys. So what would you say to a young black man or black woman now, to want them, because obviously we need more black officers as well to try to make a difference, as well as the organizations that we are associated with, in making sure that they are standing up, speaking out, and things like that.
Well, the first thing, Rosalind, is that you have to, it's like anything, you have to admit your mistakes. And just let me talk about this. Virgil and I belong to an international police chiefs association. And a few years ago at the conference, right after, I forgot which death it was, the outgoing president of that organization stood up in front of the entire profession pretty much and said that there has been an injustice to communities of color by law enforcement, and he apologized that we need to do better. So this is a white man that apologized for all of law enforcement. He was pretty much ostracized for that. And so
Where people got up and turned their
people
backs
got
and
up
walked out of
and
there.
turned their backs on him and got up and walked out because
They
he
say,
was
you don't
telling the
speak for
truth.
us.
Yeah, you don't speak for us.
Wow.
So what we have to do is we have to utilize those moments, and we have to talk about the things that we do, and we talk about the history. One of the things that I required from my those officers who are going through the academy, that every officer in the academy and every trainer in the academy had to watch the movie Selma and the documentary 13. So when you provide that information of why there's a disconnect between communities of color and law enforcement, you get people to understand and what they can do to help. I talk about my troubles and my challenges in law enforcement and how I made it through. I talk about my faith, and I talk about confidence, and I talk about humility. But we have to start going to the HBCUs and recruiting, and we have to tell the truth. We want to recruit more qualified African American men and women and people and other people of color. We don't tell the truth. We try to sugarcoat it. We have to tell people we need them. These young men and women, we need you all. We need you all in the communities. We need you all's heart and your soul and your integrity to help make this profession better, because we have slipped in so many times. But you have to just be honest, and you have to openly go out and recruit. Those are the things, and talk about the things, make them understand they are part of the solution.
Yeah.
Rosalind, and to those who are listening, a couple of things. So, a black female in Oklahoma, she was the only black female trooper in the history of Oklahoma. She went to an HBCU, which Oklahoma only has one HBCU, Langston University. She was a
Mm-hmm.
student at Langston University. They went to Langston. Some people knew her, recruited her to become the first black female trooper for the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. For the next 20 something odd years, there was never another recruitment of another black female to join the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. Never. Now there was white women that were recruited and that went through and became a trooper, but not a black female. Not even one even attempted to go through that process. That's an issue.
Mm.
Keith and I, Keith was the first black police chief in the history of Norman, Oklahoma. Norman was a sundown town. I'll let him speak on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where I am now, I'm the first black police chief in the history of this city, an all white city. So, are there opportunities that are given to us? Yes. But when you look at the makeup of the departments that you're coming into, you don't see a lot of people who look like me and Keith. And so to try to talk to young men and women to get them into this profession, knowing the dangers of this, it's a dangerous profession, but it's a profession that you can help people if that's the mindset that you have. You'll
Yes.
have some people who will say, I'd rather go work for the Secret Service or work for the federal government as an FBI agent or as an analysis, something else other, because I just don't want to deal, I just don't like what I see. So it goes back to how do we change that? And when you don't have people who look like me and Chief Humphrey in these departments, it's not going to change. It's going to continue to be that same standard good old boy system. Uh, and that's why you don't see a lot of black men and women getting in this profession. Now, down south and, you know, Alabama, Georgia, you're going to see a lot more of us because there's a lot more of us who live in those states. You go to a
Atlanta,
state like
Birmingham.
Atlanta, yeah. You
Yeah.
go to a state like South Dakota, you're not going to see no brothers and sisters in South Dakota or North Dakota. You're not,
No.
and so you go to Oklahoma, you're not going to see a whole lot of blacks. There's blacks in Oklahoma, but you're not going to see an abundance of them. You're not going to see a group of 20 black cops together because at one time, me and Keith were what we were the in the whole state of Oklahoma. There was only 5 black police chiefs. And now I'm in a state where there's only 2 black police chiefs in the whole state of Minnesota. And you
And
think
that,
about that.
and that's because we catch so much grief. Um, and we in Virgil and I talked about it. I really believe there's a playbook out there that's utilized nationwide to damage the reputation of black police executives. We can give you 10 names right now that have been, including myself, that have been chastised, that have been, families been threatened, trying to ruin reputation, and things like that. We've got peers, black peers that have been fired for no reason at all. Their names have been dragged through the mud. So it's very difficult for an African American chief, male or female. And I had a white supervisor tell me a few years ago, right after the George Floyd situation. He told me that it's a very difficult, and I said, well, after 8 hours, you can go home and you can be, you'd be a regular person. I said, I've lived this way for over 50 some years, and it's difficult for me every day as a black police chief and a black man. So, you can't compare what you're going through 8 hours a day to what I've gone through all my life and continue to go through.
Absolutely. And not even understand the dynamics, because, as Virgil has stated, going back to the 60s and law enforcement being involved in things that really have nothing to do with them, keeping people from voting and things like that. That has nothing to do with law enforcement per se. But when, unfortunately, when racism plays a part in things, here we are doing something, being involved in something, that's not your lane,
Right.
so to speak.
And there's a generational distrust also, Rosalind, because you have a lot of, we're civil rights babies. And then, we think about what happened in the 40s and 50s. And we did see police departments, all white police departments, all white National Guard, all white state troopers on those front lines, keeping people from voting, keeping people from going to schools and things like that. So you have, that's that generational resistance, because people just don't trust law enforcement, and we continue to do things to make them distrust us more, even more. This situation is not going to help that relationship. It's not going to help that relationship whatsoever. So we got to start all over again.
Absolutely. So What would you say to, to the viewers in regards to, as people, what we can do in regards to helping change the culture, helping, getting our young Black men and women wanting to be in law enforcement as a profession to help make a change? Because it's important that we we have to first be able to be a change in our own communities, because obviously we can't put it in the hands of someone else.
Yeah. So I'll respond to that. So one of the things that we're seeing in policing now, Rosalind, and to those who are listening, is that you're seeing many more cities take some of these things that policing have been involved with for decades away, such as having another alternative response to respond to a mental health call. Uh, there's been some resistance to that, and now all of a sudden, law enforcement is saying, "Well, okay, that just means we don't have to deal with that. Let somebody else deal with it." Uh, then on the other side, you have the public is demanding that law enforcement changes from what we've seen over the past several decades, especially with how the many Black men and Black women have been killed. Um, and so I think it is upon people who look like you and I to get involved in local government, your city council, uh, and asking questions about what is going on with this police department. If there is a problem with this police department, what are you all doing to change it? And that's the first step. It's getting involved with your local government. And there's a lot of cities who have police citizens academies. To me, that's just a way for some of these officers to show the public this is the type of work that we have to deal with. And now the public is going to say, oh, well, now I see why you all are so stressed out. I see why you have the attitudes that you have. Because now it's them being drilled into them that we got to chase these bad people with guns, and we don't know this and we don't know that. And so then these people become much more advocates for the police officers to say, well, when they do go out and kill somebody or seriously injure somebody, it wasn't their fault. It was a person who should have listened to the police. And so, again, I think it's a lot of people really need to get more involved with their local government, city council, and ask those questions because there's two things. For You have a strong mayor form of government where the mayor runs the city. Then you have a city manager form of government where the city manager runs the city.
Mhm.
The city manager does not really have to tell the city council or the mayor what he or she is doing because that's the way that city operates. So who controls the city manager? Well, the city council does. But if you have a city council that's not strong, that's weak, they're not going to stand up and demand these changes. And so that's why there's a lot of dysfunction within local government that starts at the top with the elected officials or non-elected officials that works its way down to the police departments.
And I think that may be part of it is, we as people not being involved, uh, in our local
If,
government
if you
and
go
things.
back, if you go back and you look at Black people, we were more involved during the civil rights era than any time in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. 80s,
Yes.
90s, now where we are, that has declined. Even when we look at Black people going to vote. And there were people who died for us to vote, but we have a generation of people who don't even care about that. And so we just have a different generation of people who have different sets of values. And I'm not saying that, people will say, well, you don't understand, you can't say that about me and my values.
Right.
But if you go back and you look at what was going on with our grandparents and our parents, what they went
Mhm.
through, they they literally fought for to have the rights to even go into a restaurant to eat,
Right.
which nowadays we don't have to deal with that. And so
Correct.
that's why there's so many people who really need to step up and get involved with what's going on in politics. But this incident that happened with Sonia Massey, and it is, we thought what we saw with George Floyd was bad,
Right.
with him kneeling on his neck for over 8 minutes. This was pure murder.
Her murder. Yes.
And rather than just really quick to kind of piggyback on that the average person does not know what their rights are. So they don't realize that as a taxpayer, you have a right to question what your police department's doing. You have a right to question what your sheriff's department's doing. Like they just feel like, okay, that person's in there and nothing's going to happen. I'm telling you that when you're vocal and you understand what your rights are, every police department should be putting their policies online so the citizens can look and see, are we following those guidelines? Those are the things that we have to get our communities to understand. You do have a right to ask questions. You do have a right to meet with that police chief. You do have a right to hold that city council person responsible, for that city manager who's responsible for the police chief. Or you do have that. You have a right to hear what they're doing, the training that they're putting out. How are they?
Hmm.
What kind of diversity training are they having? Things like that. We don't get involved, or we don't know our rights. And so we have to start as a community of people of color. We have to start knowing what our rights are. And stop thinking that nothing's going to happen. We can't change anything. That's the biggest thing right now, that we believe we can't change anything, and we've got to stop doing that.
So we have one lady, she says, but it's not the people with guns, it's the people with cell phones in hands, boiling hot water, guarding tool, and cigarettes in hand.
Well, I think I know what they're saying. It's the fact that those type of things can be seen as threats, and if used correctly or in the wrong hands. But I still go back to say that we're being trained in de-escalation. We focus on covering concealment. Absolutely, hot water can hurt you. Absolutely, a knife can hurt you. We think about guns hurting you, but there are other objects. But one of the things we talk about de-escalation, we talk about the fact that gives us an opportunity to breathe, reset, and think how we're going to respond. There was plenty of opportunities for de-escalation, plenty of opportunities for covering concealment, um, opportunity for that officer to say, well, ma'am, I'll take that pot off the stove for you. I just feel better if you let me do that. I think
Hmm.
those are things that could have been done. Yeah, there are things. If he would have gotten close to her or whatever, could that hot water have hurt him? I'm going to say, yeah, that's a possibility. But he wasn't close to her. He had an opportunity to utilize the cover and concealment. He had an opportunity to de-escalate. He didn't. So yeah, I get it what people are saying, but this was not the situation, and we're still trained in a manner of de-escalation if possible.
Right.
Deadly force is the last resort. It's the last resort. It's not, and it doesn't mean that there are times when you initially meet somebody, depending on the situation, you may not have to use, you may have to use deadly force. I don't even think the communities, I know for a fact, communities of color understand that there is a potential that deadly force may have to be used. That's not the problem. I think the problem that people of communities of color are having is, why so fast? Why so quickly?
Right.
Why jump to that conclusion? Not the fact deadly force was justified, but was there anything else you can do? And then you can't be able to articulate why you did not use those other less lethal.
Right.
That's the concern I'm hearing from communities of color.
Right. So
One of the
Tammy Joe says, what level of formal training do Leos receive on identifying mental health patients, particularly those that are
it's
in
a
crisis?
it's a joke, and I was going to respond to her question. It is an absolute joke because the state mandates once again, we go back to there's no standard. Every state
Okay.
is different. The state of Oklahoma says you may have no, I don't think it's no more than 6 hours or 8 hours in a year for mental health training.
Well,
As Keith
Virgil, they're
mentioned,
doing the
some agencies have their own, they have a higher standard, but some only require maybe 2 hours a year for
right.
mental health training. Two
Well,
hours a year.
there's an initial training that might be anywhere from 24 to 40 hours. It just depends. But on, like he said, on an annual basis, it's 2 to 4 hours mandated.
Oh
Well,
wow.
and Keith, and this is another thing, even on the initial training, you have some agencies, they're not bringing in mental health professions on those type of trainings. They got other cops who done went to the training and trained the trainer, and they're coming back teaching the training. So you got to ask yourself, is that really the proper way
Mhm.
to train police officers when
Right.
you
Oh
don't have
wow.
a
That's crazy.
trained professional mental health person doing the training? So again, you got some states who say if you get 2 hours of a year, you're good. That's a big problem. And then somebody else asked the question. I think somebody said Oklahoma, something else. Well, Oklahoma isn't the only state because there's a whole lot of the states that have very little minimum required mental health training for police officers on a continued basis. Somebody else made a comment that I saw that popped up about diversity training. Once again, another joke because it goes back to, hey, I'm in this class because I was told that I need to get these hours, and I'm gonna sit in there and okay, what did you gain from it? You got your 4 hours of diversity training. It's not going to change it because it's not in your heart. So you got
Absolutely.
agencies who are doing things to just checking the box versus doing some real things to make people really think about number one, is this a profession that I want to be in? Because this is a profession that everybody thinks they can be a cop, but then once they get in the door and they get out there, they see a whole nother world. So I go back to one of the things that Keith mentioned about showing the movie, Selma. You need to put some things in front of, which is the majority of people that are coming in the door are white males. If
Hmm.
you've never been around black people, you don't know the black culture of black people. So when a black person, you walk up to a car and a black person says, why does so and so that you pull me over? Now that guy may have just been pulled over by two or three other agencies. So now he's pretty pissed off. So he gets an attitude with you. Now you cop a bigger attitude, and it's like now you got to get out the car. Now we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, and you escalate the situation versus trying to understand why does this guy have this attitude.
And
Again,
there,
we just go back to there's just an issue. There's a concern with the soul of officers because
Hmm.
they don't want to understand people like me and you, and they'll say, well, they're just like animals. They're animals.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's the sad part because it is the soul uh, of the people.
the initial
One
contact,
lady.
the initial contact is what's important because the initial contact, the way you approach someone, is going to sometimes set the tone for how that situation is going to go. And so if you walk up to somebody with a bad, why are you speeding? Why are you driving like that? What's wrong with you? That in itself is going to be a turnoff, and it can set the tone on how this contact is going
Yes,
to it can. and
absolutely.
and so yeah, Virgil and I have this conversation, all the time. It's the dehumanization and the lack of emotional intelligence. Um, racial cultural diversity training sometimes is a check the box thing,
Hmm.
and we should be focusing on emotional intelligence, which touches on mental wellness of officers, and also the psychological part of it and the heart of an officer. The emotional intelligence is what we should really be focusing on.
Mhm. Okay, so we have a comment that says, so you're saying when you're outnumbered, just roll with it. What about your sons, nephews, cousins?
No, we're not saying just
No,
roll with it.
not at all.
No, we're not saying just roll with it. And I wonder if they could elaborate a little bit more on that. I think, you know, we are definitely outnumbered. And I think, we have to utilize the voices that we have. If we're being put into positions and being put into spaces that you don't normally see black men and black women, we don't need to be afraid to utilize our voices for that. Uh, you got people who get into positions, Rosalind, and to those who are listening, who are making a very good six-figure salary, and they don't want to say anything because they don't want to lose that six-figure salary. At the end of the
Hmm.
day, what does that say about you as an individual person? Are you standing up for what's right? Are you not going to say anything because you don't want to lose that very good six-figure salary? That's
Hmm.
where, and that's when you talk about the soul of somebody. We're also talking about the soul of black people in this profession. Don't stand on the sidelines and be quiet when your department is there's issues within your department, but you don't want to say anything because you got that six-figure salary. Are you
Absolutely.
afraid that you're going to have to go up against the unions? You got to stand up for what's right. And
Or
at
you
the end
got
of the day, if you
weekends
lose
off,
that,
day shift.
yeah, if at the end of the day, if you lose that six-figure salary, I would rather do that and know that, you know, there's a lot of people that's going to respect me a whole lot more for standing up, saying and doing the right thing than for me just standing on the sideline saying nothing.
But that's the part of your faith kicking in as well in regards to doing that, because then that, hey, okay, if I'm doing this, if I'm standing up, what I'm saying, I'm doing the right thing because I believe. So that you're covered because you know who you ultimately believe in, and that's God.
Hmm.
Whereas for some people,
Yeah.
that's not the case.
I
Dr.
like this
Londa
question
said,
that this person just asked.
Yeah.
okay, you can go ahead with it. I don't have to read it then.
Yeah.
So I will tell
Yeah.
you in the
So, so
cities, I will tell you in the cities that I've been chief, I've gotten a lot of support from the African American ministers, to the point that when I was in my last city before now, uh, the African American faith based community came out in droves to support me, 1,000%, and talked about the history of that organization and why they were so resistant to change because of the history. So I've had very positive relationships with the African American, the Black clergy in the cities where I've worked.
yeah, and I can
And
say
that,
the same thing. And I think this is another thing that we also need to that doesn't happen. You have agencies who don't reach out to the black clergy because once again, it kind of goes back. Well, we've never done this before, so you got to get to know the people in your community. Every city has a black church in that city, but not every police chief knows that black pastor, and that black pastor doesn't know that black police chief or doesn't know that police chief, whether you're a black police chief or a white police chief. So it's really important for not just black police chiefs to make those relationships with those black clergy. It's really important for white police chiefs to do the same thing. Uh, because you will get that support uh, from uh, from those clergy. Uh, and I was in a city where I had to arrest a black pastor for for a sex crime. I thought it was going to be the end of the end, but I had a lot of other pastors who said, that's just not what we stand for. So thank you for standing up and thank you for taking the leadership to arrest this person for the sex
mhm.
crimes that they committed against a young female juvenile. So you got to build those relationships. And I think that's something that oftentimes you don't see a lot of us doing. And again, it
Right.
depends on what part of the country you're in, because you may have, once again, if you're down south in Atlanta, Georgia, Birmingham, you may have agents who have a very good relationship with their faith-based organization members.
I've had a positive relationship with black and white clergy in the
Okay.
cities that I've been involved in. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, I had one predominantly white church invite me to talk about as a black chief the challenges that I faced and what the communities of color were facing or why communities of color were uh, upset with law enforcement. And this was right after the Michael Brown situation. So for that minister to invite me to and told the church that this is something we need to hear as a privileged ethnicity. We need to hear this. So it's I've had, like I said, I've had great relationships with the clergy, whether it's Asian, whether it's Hispanic, like I said, whether it's rabbi, whether it's Muslim. I've had amazing relationships with clergy.
So we're going to take a couple more because we don't want to, I know you guys' time is very precious. So we're going to answer part of this. What does community policing actually mean?
So it's a partnership. That's what it means, and that was a term that term's been around for hundreds of years. That term started in England under the Metropolitan Policing for Robert Peel, and so it's a partnership. It's actually a partnership. Simply as that, it's a philosophy. That's a partnership philosophy that says the police and the community have to work together for the betterment of that community. But that's been something that's been pushed to the side because of 21st century policing. Because when you have community oriented policing, there were police departments throughout the nation saying that we're doing community oriented policing because it sounded sexy, because there was funding tied to that. If you had a community oriented
Okay.
policing or community policing program, you were able to receive grant money and things like that. Okay. So nobody really knew what to do with it. So 21st century policing came around in 2015, and I would ask you and the audience to go back and look at that study and look at the 6 pillars of 21st century policing. So now that's community oriented policing on steroids. So now we have a roadmap of what it should really look like. This is what we need to do. This is what direction we need to go. This is how we do it. So now there's no excuse, Rosalind, to the audience for these things that we're seeing to be happening because there is a roadmap that was developed in 2015 by President Obama and different community leaders. It's there. It's there for the following. The resources are there. And so I just wanted to say that that's what it looks like. It looks like an all-inclusive partnership with everybody being able to come to the table and talk about what they feel, what they need, and what assistance that's needed.
Okay.
So my response to that is community policing has been one of those words that everybody has used, and everybody does something different. There's nothing standard with it. It goes back to what we just talked about with 21st century community policing that came out in 2015. There's a lot of departments that put it up on their website and say, "Oh, look, we got the 6 pillars of 21st century community policing," but you're not doing anything. You're making it look good, just like you're saying, "Oh, we're doing community policing. We're getting out. We may go over here and shoot some hoops with the kids in the black community or in the Latino community. We may go over here. We may do this. We may do that." But guess what? While you're doing that, you got officers who are still doing the same thing to uh, to black people, to brown people, but you're saying we're doing community policing. Community policing should be about embedding yourself in that community, understanding that community, the culture of that community. And it's not about policing, it's about community. It's all community and understanding the Asian culture, understanding the Latino culture, understanding the black community culture, whatever other races in your city, understanding that culture. So when they need the police, they are they're going to call the police. They're not going to be, I'm not. like in the Hispanic community, they're not going to call the police because they're too afraid of being deported or sent back to where they came from. So community policing is about the community. If we take out community, it's about nothing but the community. But the police officers have to, once again, we go back to where's your heart, where's your soul? Is this something that you really want to do? Because if the agency says, "Hey, we got $1 million to do community policing," oh, and by the way, you get some overtime for doing that. So now it's a
Mhm.
benefit to the officers to go hang out because guess what? I go from making $60 an hour to making $120 an hour. That's a benefit for me to go and do that. I'm really not there for community policing. I'm really there for the overtime.
Hey,
And
Virgil.
you got some officers who are there for the right reasons, but then you got
Mhm.
some of the officers there for the wrong reasons, and the wrong reasons is to get that money because they're not trying to make any connection with those black and brown kids in that community.
Hey, Roslyn. I want to know where that job is making $120 an hour. Uh,
Keith,
because
hey man, there's some agencies
hey,
who
I know,
are
but I'm just
already,
saying, where can I go make that $120 an hour and do the right thing?
yeah.
Listen, listen. This has been so enlightening. The information. I'm really hoping that the viewers have gained some insight, and if nothing else, that they've learned about their rights and being more active. As Black people in our community and what's going on, with our law enforcement, and because we have to be able to stand and make a change, and we can't just depend on you guys because you're obviously outnumbered, and so that means that you need the support of us in the communities, to help you guys. You can't do it by yourselves. uh,
Mhm.
and my prayer is that that the officers that are hired, that we know where their heart and their soul is, and that they have a heart and a soul, um, for everyone. We know that we're going to always encounter some people who are not going to have that situation. But I also know that if they want to hear more in regards to you and the law, that they can tune in on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and they can hear Chief Keith Humphrey and Chief Virgil Green keeping it very transparent in regards to the conversations about the law. They're on all the platforms, so you can catch them on YouTube, Facebook, Apple, all of those lovely things. If you want to hear some more from these wonderful gentlemen that took the time out of their Saturday to share it with us and give us their insight and what they have dealt with and what they're dealing with still in today's society, in law enforcement and in life, and just being a Black man, period. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. I know you didn't have to,
Right.
so I really do appreciate you
If I
taking
could
out
say
the time.
something real quick,
Absolutely.
if I could say it real quick, it's You and the Law podcast show. So I think people, if you don't put in You and the Law podcast show in your searches, you may not find us. So it's You and the Law podcast show. We have a website which is www.youandthelawpodcastshow.com. That's www.youandthelawpodcastshow.com. You go to that website, you'll see all of our uh, links to all of our social media platforms, but it's youandthelawpodcastshow.com.
So please, if you missed that, you can come back, watch the replay, but you can also reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to give you the information in regards to You and the Law podcast show. Please support these gentlemen because we need to be more involved. So by staying connected to someone who has our better interests at heart is absolutely uh, going to be something we need to do. And as always, on the Line and Bean Company Network, we have other shows that you would be very grateful that you joined. And so let's go ahead and run our shows. We have Motivation Moments with Greg Bloomfield on Sundays at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. You don't want to miss it. And then we have Lonnie B, Morning Tea with Lonnie B, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. You don't want to miss that, starting off with the word. And then on Thursdays, we have Motivation Moments Multivitamin with Greg Bloomfield at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then every third Friday, we have Time of Refreshing at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time with Manny Cush. You don't want to miss that. And then we have ARM, Africa Restoration Movement, every second and fourth Friday at 8 a.m. with Manny Cush. You don't want to miss it. We come on Wednesdays, Word on Wednesday Bible Study, 7:30 p.m. with Victorious Victory International Church. You don't want to miss the word. Then we have the Mrs. Conference, virtual conference on Saturday, August the 24th with Dr. Amanda Randolph. You don't want to miss this amazing guest, and you don't want to miss the Refine Conference featured by ORM on August the 24th with Pastor uh, Thad Randolph as well. So those are some things. And of course, you don't want to miss none other than myself, Roslyn Long, with Dear Life After on Saturdays live at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Please follow me on Facebook, YouTube. I thank you all for your support. And as always, make it a great day on purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you.